5 more years for Macron. According to data from the French Ministry of the Interior, Emmanuel Macron, the incumbent French president, won nearly 60% of the votes, while his opponent Marine Le Pen from the far right won over 40%, making it a closer race for the second round than their last face-off in 2017, when Macron won by a landslide. What do these results say about French people's political sentiments, and how does this result impact China-France ties and even potentially China-EU ties? I'm pleased to be joined from Paris in the middle of the night by Professor Douglas Yates from the School of Political Science at the American Graduate School in Paris, and from Beijing, Professor Ding Yifan, Chair Professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University, also a Senior Fellow at Taihe Institute, a leading think tank headquartered in Beijing. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. So, Professor Ding, let me go to you first. As I said, Macron is winning, or has won, the second round of the French presidential election, winning 58.5% of the votes, and Le Pen estimated to have won 42.5%. That's according to data from the French government. Is this in line with your expectations?
Somehow, yes. To some extent, we expected that Macron will continue to run the election and continue to run for the next 5-year president, because Macron's support is broadly shared by European countries, and also because even in this French presidential campaign, other political forces were concentrated on excluding Marine Le Pen from the election, because the extreme right wing is still considered as a very dangerous by French people up until now. So other political forces will continue to support Macron, even if they don't totally share Macron's view about French national political policies or European policies, but to some extent, they don't want Le Pen to be the president, because to some extent, right-wing politicians is still regarded with a lot of suspicion in France.
So that does not mean, you're saying basically the winning of Macron does not mean that people support him particularly, but that they don't want Le Pen to be in power. Dr. Yates, is that your observation as well?
Yes, well, apart from her die-hard supporters, Emmanuel Macron was perceived as the lesser of two evils. In the there was about the same number of people had voted for the far left-wing candidate Mélenchon, and when they came to the second round, they didn't know who to vote for. It was between, on the one hand, a Le Pen, who clearly is xenophobic, racist, with populist socialism of the worst kind. She wanted to basically only give welfare to French people. And on the other hand, a Macron who's perceived as neoliberal, insensitive to the needs of the poor, the president of the rich. So it was described as a choice between the plague and cholera.
Wow. But yet again, the rise of support for Le Pen seems to be obvious, even from the first round, results from the first round. She did gain more support, and then the second round, the difference between Le Pen and Macron is also narrower. In the first, in their face-off last time, 2017, it was 70% versus 30% between the two. Now this time is 60% versus 40% between the two. I mean, rising popularity for Le Pen, pretty obvious there. Professor Ding, how do you look at that?
For me, it's to some extent an expression of the popular anger, because people were not satisfied with Emmanuel Macron did for the past 5 years. They feel unhappy about the inflation rate. They feel unhappy about the reduction of social welfare system. So that's why people were not so happy to vote for Macron. Look at the differences of the first round result. for those so-called extremist candidates. Not only Le Pen is a far-right candidate, but also another candidate from the far right wing is called the Move. The Move presented something similar to Marine Le Pen, but he got also, for the first time, he's a freshman in political arena, but for the first time, he preached this, he made his campaign over the same themes like Marine Le Pen, and he surprisingly he got a lot of popular votes for the first round. And don't underestimate the influence of Mélenchon. Mélenchon also is considered as the extreme left wing in political spectrum. And this time, Mélenchon won a lot of votes, especially young people's vote, so that at the end of the first round, you have some sort of a riot around the campus, around those young among those young students, because they really feel frustrated because their candidate has not been able to come into the second round.
Right.
Because
Jean-Luc.
according to French
Right.
electoral system,
Right.
so
So, sorry for
only the
interrupting.
two.
Yeah, Mr. Mélenchon actually said this after the results is out. He said Macron is the worst elected president of the Fifth Republic. He said for the second round, Le Pen and Macron represent only a little more than 1/3 of registered voters. Dr. Yates, how do you look at this comment? What does that say? And how is the situation going to develop if the status quo is not changed? Because you see the far right going up and you see the far left also going up, but not represented by Macron.
Right. The two-round ballot was an institution created by Charles de Gaulle to guarantee that the president would have arithmetically a majority. But it creates a lot of distortion. So with over a quarter of the electorate abstaining because they didn't see a candidate for them, or because it was also holidays here in France, and many people were actually more interested in taking their time off than voting, and as well with then a large percentage of those who did vote, voting blank or just deciding not to participate with either of the two candidates, you have a President Macron who appears to have 58% of the support, but in fact has about a third of the registered voters. Now, in a country like the United States, that wouldn't be so bad, maybe for an off-year election. But for France, these were very low results, and it's perceived as showing a systemic lack of confidence in the mainstream electoral system. And so there's brewing a storm on the horizon, and that storm is represented by voters who are moving to the extremes. On the one hand, towards Mélenchon, and the other towards Le Pen.
So what does the lower turnout really say? Is that, Dr. Yates, does that tell us about the frustration or the lack of confidence? Because you mentioned the lower turnout and the higher number of voter abstention as well. Is that a reflection of people? They're just saying, okay, we're not going to vote because it's not going to make a difference.
That's right. So there's two schools of thought with low turnout. One traditional school was that it means that people are okay with the system, so they don't feel the need to vote. And the other, which I think is the correct interpretation for this, is that people don't believe their vote matters. They don't believe their vote is giving them a real choice. The election campaign was dominated by the right. The left had very little vote because the traditional Socialist Party was eliminated. The Green Party didn't have a charismatic candidate. And so you had a television personality, Eric Zemmour, who was spewing out horrible xenophobic racism. And you had Marine Le Pen, who was doing populism. And in the center, you had Emmanuel Macron, who was promising a lot of unpopular reforms. Most French just didn't see themselves in that, and they didn't come out to vote.
Let's talk about the impact of this result on China-France relations. Professor Ding, how do you see the impact on China-France relations? Because Macron is perceived to have some kind of a swinging between tough and soft stances towards China. He was an advocate of the China-EU Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, but also his government introduced the so-called anti-Huawei law to phase out the 5G systems produced by Huawei. So what is the impact in your eyes?
I think that Macron's policy toward China is to some extent ambiguous. Because on the one hand, he said he wanted to maintain a very cordial and good relationship with China. Especially, he just established a sort of a warm working relationship with President Xi Jinping, and he promised to come to China despite the pandemic. He promised to come to China frequently to pay attention to the maintaining of good relationship between China and France. But in reality, since he came to power, he tried to adopt a serious policy that are considered as suspicious, such as his policy with regard to Indo-Pacific strategy. For example, we know that Indo-Pacific strategy has been worked out by the United States as an instrument to contain China in the region. And then Macron just adopted another Indo-Pacific strategy to accompany the US strategy in these areas.
Okay.
And then for more than once, Macron said publicly that with regard to China's rise, he should he should be approaching more India to try to make India a counterbalance to China's rise. All these
I see, Professor Ding. Yeah, let me give the final minute, let's say, to Dr. Yates. Time is really limited. What is your view of the impact on China-France relations and possibly China-EU relations in the next 5 years, Dr. Yates?
Well, this is nothing but good news. Imagine a Marine Le Pen presidency. Relations with China would have been terrible. Relations with the outside world would have been terrible. Macron is a diplomat. He's someone who always gives a preference towards voice. He's willing to meet. He's willing to talk. Of course, there will be disputes, but they won't turn into conflicts. Macron will never use bellicose language, and he will meet with Xi Jinping, and he'll attempt to stand as an intermediary between the opponents of China's rise to power and the proponents. Okay. I think this is good news.
All right. Dr. Ding, do you agree or not, or do you want to say wait and see?
Yes,
Which one?
Yes. To some extent, Macron is a smart people, so with smart people we can negotiate, even we are disagree.
Okay,
we disagree on a lot of issues. We can still try to negotiate and to work out somehow a compromise.
All right. We have to leave it there. Time is really limited, but I think we got your point. Thank you so much, Douglas Yates, professor at the American Graduate School in Paris, joining us in the middle of the night, and Professor Ding Yifan, chair professor at the Beijing Foreign Studies University.